We're here on the International Day of Monuments and Sites to talk about cultural landscapes and their critical role in responding to climate change. This idea of cultural heritage and climate change was really initially put forward with IDMS through this report that 32 expert members of IDMS put together and submitted to the World Heritage Committee in 2019. And that was to address some of the issues in terms of the United Nations framework on climate change, in terms of adaptation, mitigation, and loss and damage. So a couple of the questions that came up through the preparation of that report was, how do we use heritage as a climate action asset during migration and displacement? And what does that mean for cultural landscapes in particular? So we have issues around the impacts to sites and how they act as a barometer for the community to stress urgency in the community. Iconic sites and landscapes give us a sense of place will change and or be lost in terms of climate change. And that really sets a tone of urgency for the public in responding to climate change. How does heritage add to community resilience? That is a major piece of the important role of cultural landscapes, because human beings need continuity. And cultural heritage, particularly in landscapes, teaches us who we are and where we came from. And heritage is almost the validity to exist, to belong to locations, and the ownership of a certain place. There's also no single heritage. We rewrite our heritage, bringing along the past into the future. So there's this constant tension between heritage and the past and the way that it is becoming our future. And the third question that came out of the report was the question of migration and how to use it as a climate adaptation strategy and the impacts of this climate adaptation strategy of migration. And the key is agency, providing the tools for communities to recreate themselves and bringing along the aspects of heritage that provide support, ontological security, and sense of place as they are in movement. So today we've got three presentations about those basic questions in terms of cultural landscapes. Doug Evans will be talking about Tirley Church, and that will be the first presentation, a holistic cultural landscape approach to climate change resilience. And then Anna Makura will be talking about the ancestral legacy from the Andes, which is the recovery of seeds and plants for climate resilience, an incredibly important approach. And then I will wrap up with some early results on moving communities in the United States and what happens to cultural heritage during the process and outcome of relocation. So first of all, Tirley Church with Doug Evans.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Hello to everyone, and thank you for joining us here today to celebrate the International Day for the Monuments and Sites. My name is Doug Evans, and for 38 years I lived in England, where I worked as a conservation architect. I now live in Canada. I'm an expert member of the IDMS scientific committees for cultural landscapes, places of religion and ritual, and of wood. And I'm a former trustee of ICMOS UK. My talk today will consider the need to adopt holistic cultural landscape approaches to climate change resilience by presenting a case study of St Michael and All Angels Church in Tirley, Gloucestershire. The case study is based on an application by Tirley Church in the Diocese of Gloucester to the World Monuments Fund to have the church included as an endangered site on the 2022 World Monuments Watch List. The church was appealing for help and engaging with specialists to carry out a study of the church and its site to better understand mitigation measures that could be implemented to minimize flood damage. Permissions have been received from the World Monuments Fund and the Parish Council of Tirley Church to use their project as a case study. The case study will look at issues including underrepresented heritage, climate risks facing the site and its community, social, economic factors, imbalanced tourism, and then we'll consider how the project could better respond to urgent global challenges and address other timely issues with relevance beyond the site. Tirley is located in southern England in the county of Gloucestershire. The church is located 785 meters from a bend in the River Severn. The landscape was once traditional water meadows, said to be from the mid-17th century onwards. The southeast corner of the churchyard is only 14 meters from the end of one of the disused water meadow ditches. St Michael's and All Angels Church in Tirley, Gloucestershire is a Grade 1 designated heritage building with 13th and 14th century origins and was altered in 1894. The church consists of a nave, chancel, and west tower built in the perpendicular style and a 19th century timber frame porch. The churchyard includes a number of 18th century Grade 2 designated chest tombs. In 2007 and again in 2020, the church and churchyard experienced severe flood damage. Various factors contribute to the need for action at Tirley Church, at the Tirley Church Water Meadows site. The most significant include the impact of flooding and the social and economic factors. First, the impact of flooding. The River Severn is Britain's longest river, stretching 355 kilometers from the Welsh Mountains to the estuary leading into the Bristol Channel. Tributaries flowing into the Severn include the rivers Wye and Avon, and they, with the Severn, all have a floodplain landscape that was once traditional water or riverside meadows. Many of the communities in the Severn Basin suffer regular flood events. The town of Tewkesbury, for example, 7 kilometers upriver from Tirley, saw its largest recorded floods in 1484, 1587, 1611, 1673, 1770, 1814, 1853, 1947, and again in 2007. The impact of flooding on many heritage sites in the Severn Basin is severe, as was seen at Tirley in 2007 and again in 2020. What are the climate risks facing the site and its community? Well, Tirley Church is located in a high-risk flood zone as designated by the UK Environment Agency. The land is a functional floodplain, most at risk of flooding from rivers or the sea, and has a 5% or 1 in 20 year probability of flooding. Reporting in the media on the severe floods of 2007 and 2020 in the Severn Basin communicated the urgency of the climate crisis and its impact on heritage sites in the region. The County Council, in its 2014 flood risk management strategy, promised to work with parish councils to identify the location and ownership of drainage ditches, and ordinary watercourses, and to support parish councils to work with local landowners to clear drainage ditches and ordinary watercourses. However, flood zone mapping published by the county does not distinguish between landscape typologies or ownership. And without more such information, it is difficult to see how the county council's promises will be effective. Regrettably, neither the county archaeologist or the diocesan advisory committee are aware of any studies to date of Gloucestershire's water meadows. Social and economic factors that contribute to the need for action at Tirley include financial resources. Small parish councils normally have small finance resources limited to maintenance and minor repairs. Dioceses and the Church of England do not normally fund projects. Historic England may fund research, as they have done in Herefordshire. Funding for landscape remediation project is normally quite limited and dictated by local politics. And as a result of the pandemic, any available funds will be directed to other more pressing sectors for the foreseeable future. Next is skills, knowledge, and human resources. Volunteers are stretched, being asked as they are to support more and diverse community-based issues. Next, transparency and participation in decision-making. Flood management is seen as a national and county level issue. The large municipal and county councils are allowing the smaller parish councils less and less influence in the land use decision-making process. Next is unrecognized and marginalized stakeholders. Conservation officers, county archaeologists, and parish councils are all being marginalized under recent changes to the planning system in the UK and the current economy. Next is limitation to use or access. Water meadows are mostly privately owned farmland. Changes in protective status is another factor. Water meadows occasionally will be included in designated sites of special scientific interest. These are usually described as an area that is of particular interest to science due to the rare species of fauna or flora it contains, or even more important geological or physiological features that may lie in its boundaries. SSSIs sometimes include ancient woodland and monuments. The meadows near Tirley are not designated. Any project to improve the flooding and climate change resilience at Tirley Church will have the potential to highlight the underrepresented heritage of two narratives, namely endangered places of faith and wetlands, and the importance of the rural communities that support, protect, and maintain them. First, endangered places of faith. Places of faith around the world are under threat of becoming irrelevant in contemporary culture. Here you can see average Sunday attendance at Tirley Church is between 10 and 15 people. It should also be noted that a grade 1 designation in England does not protect a church from becoming redundant. The other underrepresented narrative and heritage is wetlands. A water or wet meadow is a type of wetland with soils that are saturated for part or all of the growing season. Water meadows were managed wetlands, and wetlands are recognized as being of international importance. However, in common with many historic features of the English rural landscape, water meadows are poorly protected, and research has shown a high rate of attrition. Water meadow remains are frequently unidentified and underrepresented in the UK's historic environment records, as seen here by the attached areas identified simply as archaeological events. Water meadows are areas of land that used to be flooded deliberately under carefully controlled conditions, the timing being at the discretion of the farmer or landowner. The relative benefits to the landowner vary depending on the type of water meadow and the local farming regime, but control of flooding was what made them different from floodplain meadows, grazing marshes, or other naturally flooded areas. Statutory protection of water meadows is rare. Water meadows have attracted some academic interest. Despite this, some aspects are still poorly understood. Formal assessment of the significance of sites led by legislation tends to be based on plant diversity, yet other aspects of water meadows, such as their nutrient trapping, farming, amenity, cultural, and historical value, have received far less recognition. Wetlands generally have been taken for granted and are undervalued. Invasive species, pollution, unsustainable development, and climate change are all taking their toll, with wetlands under more pressure than ever before. 35% of the UK wetlands have disappeared since 1970. Wetlands are disappearing 3 times faster than forests. 25% of wetland species face extinction. 11% of new homes built in England between 2016 and 17 were constructed on floodplains, including wetlands. Figures show this proportion was an increase on the 7% of total homes built in 2013 to 14, and is a continuation of a growing trend to build in flood zones. The application to the World Monuments Watch by the Church and Diocese outlined a plan of action which noted that the challenges are about flooding and keeping the doors open. The vision for the site was to develop sustainable solutions that could help both Tirley and other sites to raise awareness of environmental issues contributing to the challenges of Tirley Church, and to target new audiences and teach them about the heritage of the building and the community and its ongoing fight against flooding. This is certainly an admirable goal. The plan of action included a brief for flood impact and protection survey, or a flood impact and protection survey, that was intended to cover only the church building and its churchyard. There was no suggestion in the survey brief that reasons for the flooding should be investigated, especially regarding the fact that the church and churchyard sit in a landscape that was once traditional water meadows. In their application, the church and diocese stated that flood risk management for the overall landscape is a long-term project and does not focus on the resilience needed by buildings in the short term when repeatedly hit by flood events. It's important to note here that the focus of both bodies is built heritage, and only that which is within the churchyard boundary. The statement above almost seems to disregard approaches to heritage projects that have a more holistic cultural landscape point of view. The church's vision for the site appeared to focus solely on mitigating against the effects of flooding. Their World Monuments Watch application did not take into account the historic and natural features of the cultural landscape within which the church and its churchyard are located. Could the church's plan of action have been improved? Were there any factors that were not taken into account sufficiently? Yes, the application might have been improved if they had widened the scope of their project to encompass nature and culture issues, particularly wetlands and historic water meadows. The UK's Wildlife and Wetlands Trust notes that if rainforests are the lungs of the planet, then wetlands are the lifeblood, and they protect us from extreme weather events and help us recover better from disasters. Historic England has published detailed studies and reports on the cultural significance of water meadows. In 2018, Historic England commissioned an independent study on the water meadows of a neighboring county, Herefordshire. To date, there has been no similar study undertaken of Gloucestershire's water meadows. The county should be encouraged to commission one. Restoration of water meadows can provide model adaptation strategies at the site community scale. The UK's National Trust has shown how wetlands and water meadows can be restored at their site on the Sherburn Estate in Gloucestershire. Another good example is the restoration of the Harnham Water Meadows near Salisbury, where the work was carried out by community volunteers. Unlike ancient woodland and rainforest that take centuries to regenerate, new technologies mean communities can restore traditional water meadows or create new wetlands in a matter of months or a few years. It's an area where community support can make a real impact. Government designated sites of scientific interest in Gloucestershire include 2 historic water meadows, and grants are available through the UK government Countryside Stewardship Programme for the management of sites of special scientific interest, including historic water meadows, through traditional irrigation options. The UK National Trust has restored an historic water meadow site at Sherburn, as mentioned a minute ago. And holistic cultural landscape approach to climate change resilience for Tirley Church also has the potential to promote sustainable tourism and support controlled heritage visitation. Restored wetlands increased access to the countryside. In 2021, the UK Wildlife and Wetlands Trust reported that around the world, 50% of international tourists seek relaxation in wetland areas, supporting millions of jobs. The Wildlife and Wetlands Trust has noted that wetland restoration and creation projects are an area where community support can make a real impact. Grants are available through the UK government's Countryside Stewardship Programme. The Wildlife and Wetlands Trust also notes that perhaps 1,000 volunteers from local communities bring wetland nature alive for visitors to their wetland centres and help to monitor wildlife and maintain wetland habitats. If any project to improve the flood resilience of our historic places is to be successful, sustainable community capacity building must be encouraged, requiring a broad collaboration of all the people and organizations with a stake in the natural and built landscape. And holistic cultural landscape approach to any project for Tirley Church should ensure that rural communities, including parish councils, local nature charities, and farmers, are given a greater voice in the way rural heritage is safeguarded, and include them in decision-making processes about heritage places. Traditional water meadows have been neglected since the 1930s, and the holistic cultural landscape approach has the potential to redress the damage done to these cultural landscapes from incompatible use and management. By leveraging the historic importance and cultural significance of Tirley Church itself and the need there for improved flood resilience, an awareness and dialogue about the natural and cultural landscape that the church sits in can be generated. That dialogue has the potential to mobilize support for the protection and rehabilitation of the water meadow landscape as an integral part of protecting and caring for the built heritage. In turn, the results of the project will have the potential to establish new models for heritage practice and policy.
Good morning, good evening, buenos días, buenas tardes, bonjour. Thank you very much to be here. I'm Ana Bascura. I'm architect and landscape planner. I'm part of a firm, Bascura y Asociados, and we work in landscape planner and landscape design in different scales, and research in heritage cultural landscapes. Today I will speak about an ancestral legacy from the Andes, the recovery of seeds and plants for climate resilience. Life besides the Cordillera, Ecuador, Peru, Bolivia, northern and central Argentina, with the dry and arid climates, with a wide temperature range, -10 degrees to 30 degrees centigrade, between night and day, make and extend survival life. The recovery of the seeds for food production creates an opportunity to face climate change. It's not only to recover the seeds, the parts of plants, and the landscape. We can recover quinoa, amaranth, chuño, varieties of Andean potatoes, chili, varieties of corn. We have been observed that there are legume species with high protein value that are cultivated in the area for family use. Causes. I will speak especially from Argentina, but all South America have more or less the same problem. Argentina is agro-exporting country and is a nature-dependent territory. Soil, water, and climate are vital elements for the production. In 2022-23, 40% crops were lost on account of climate change. We have been going through 3 years of drought, longer and faster frost, west heat waves with a lot of temperatures and unexpected winds in different seasons. All of that caused a lot of problems in the growth of the crops. Consequences. The climate change affects the production directly, economic crash, nutrition problems, because all food, the prices grow up and the people have no money to buy them. And the more problem is for the children. And then health difficulties. You can see some photos from this summer in different places. The wetland is dry, all as a consequences. What we can do? Assets. We need to recover the connection with nature as a physical dimension, ancestral knowledge, native seeds, oral transmission. And we can use what we have now, connecting with technology, DNA as a virtual, Creole seeds, World Wide Web. What I will explain the difference between native seeds and Creole seeds. Native seeds are those that produce in the same place without separation, without, it's all the same seed. The Creole seeds are those that the people, by human, change and select the best and then plant the best seeds. That is Creole seeds. There are from native origin, but the human without only to selection by persons. We need to exchanging and interviewing nature culture from the beginning to nowadays. We need to join people, government, research areas, knowledge sharing. Argentina adopted the Nagoya Protocol, TIRFA agreement, and SGDs. In these photos, you can see the people working, and here the government professionals exchanging with the people. Opportunities, what we can do with all we have, all these assets. Opportunities, food, forest, and health. First, family, we have different cases. Family producers, government research entity, INTA, INASE. INTA is the Argentine Institute of Agropecuarian Technology, and INASE is the National Seed Institute, in English, the translator. And if we join the three parts, we produce seeds exchange fairs. The other case, universities, INTA, INASE, generate and regulation the preservation heritage. And then they protect them in German plus banks. Third, indigenous communities, reservation areas, and INTA INASE can recovering and remedying forest. The other case, families, reservation areas, INTA INASE collect and produce food. These are different examples that can remediate and can afford climate change. Third, you can look at the photos, the different aspects from the different insects, the people with a long way to sell the seeds, to exchange, the production, the fruits, Andean potatoes, corn, different kinds of corns. This example is we join family producers, government research entity, and to generate seeds exchange fairs. Here is native seeds from the origin of the place, Creole seeds obtained by selection with human intervention over time. Creole seeds, which correspond to fruits, are pumpkins, corn, tomato, watermelon, melon, alfalfa for truffle, lettuce, chard. Here another example with the fair. The agroecological producers and artisans from the area of Abaucan is in the Precordillera Valley, near the Bolsolo Fiambala. The day before of the fair, there is a meeting in view of popular education, exchanging experience between peasant and indigenous groups. Always is the presence of the government and the people. The government is always hand to hand with the people in the place. And in the fairs, they exchange not only seeds, but different products, marmalades, handcraft, etc. Another opportunity is with universities, INTA INASE, regulation and preservation heritage with German plus banks. In Argentina, INTA has a German plus bank network and is made up 9 active banks and 9 active collections. Here in the photos, we can see other professionals, and this is a bank Éxito because it's in the open air and is temporary. Different transitions is not to maintain the same seed in a place. They can prove and make the growth. Here is the German Plus Bank inside, where the seeds are dry till 5% humidity and is protect with humidity and low temperatures. The other, indigenous communities, reservation areas with INTA, recovering and remedying forest. This is another place. This is not in the Andes. This is in northeast of Argentina. It's near the tropical, more or less subtropical area. INASE registered the first native seed production area. That's named Absen, in a Mibia Guarani community in Puerto Iguazú, provincia de Misiones. INTA allows by this certificate a group of people, in this example is a community in Via Guarani, to collect seeds and part of plants and then to produce the plants, and they can sell them, and some they use for reforest. All this traceability, from the seed to the little plant, all is registered by INTA. The Jaycipora community achieve its registration with the aim of reforesting its territory and providing nurseries in areas with native species and traceability of origin. Misiones is the first province that can register this work during these certificates. In this case, it's in a native forest area with a surface of 600 hectares, 242 acres. The provinces of Chaco and Córdoba are in process of registration too. The other provinces have not this registration. Silvana Babbitt, president of INASE, highlighted the collaborative work that brought together recognition specialists in the field of native forest and ornamental species with the ancestral knowledge of community. Here you can see the people, the group professionals and peasants, the community inside of the nursery and the certificate. Another case, families in reservation areas with the collaboration of INTA INASE can collect and produce food. One thing, for example, with the German plus banks and in these other cases, it's not only the work of INTA, it's the principal work of INTA, but collaborate different universities in the different place they are working. In this case, Viva el Monte Luyaba is a community production project. They collect fruits from the mountains and have different collection of the bioregion of Gran Chaco Americano, algarroba, chañar, mistol, tuna, piquillín. They are different plants, trees. They collect seeds to recover ancestral way of gathering and preparing food. The people protect the forest and prepare food in an ancestral way, respecting nature and the people. This is to reevaluating the ancestral food. In this case, there was a woman that was embracing and have a little child of 7 years old, and he hasn't worked. And instead of began to cry, what we can do in this place? They were alone and they began to join the fruits of the trees. They know that is possibility and began to produce fatai, processed food that they can eat during the year. And she never imagined that this beginning will have another connections and different, the people of the town began to join, and with INTA and INASE, they began to collect the seeds, and here at algarrobo seeds, fruits, and they select and collect and put in different nylons. Here is the railway station. They have not placed, this is the abandoned railway station. And here are different products, and now, after 20 years, they can sell products and live in these terms. They can live about the cultural place. Another cooperativa, Cauqueva, from Maimara, this is from the Andes, in Jujuy province. Producers co-cooperative, produce organic food with Creole seeds. The products began to be marketed in Buenos Aires. I bought this pasta. They are advised, you can see, Federation of Cooperativas y Organizaciones, INTA, IPAF-NOA from the Northway, National University of Jujuy, National University of Buenos Aires. There are a lot of groups of professionals that allow and can advise them. Here is the place, the factory, pasta, and here are the crops. And there's, they are smoking as cultural ancestors. In Tucumán, in the middle of the center of the República, the Amaiches Community Warehouse is the first indigenous winery in Latin America, wine without chemicals and fertilizers. It's the third in the world. The first warehouse is in Australia, the other in Canada, and now in Argentina. It is a producers cooperative situated in a not wine producing area till now. It was, when they began, was not a wine producer area. It has a community concept based on its origin linked to 16th. There are 60 families, descendants of the native peoples of the area. Annual produce 50,000 liters, mainly produce 80% Malbecs and a Creole variety 20%. Its main label is Sumacawasco. For me it's difficult. Kawsai in Quechua language means good living. Produced medium range, high altitude with a strong identity. Their retail price, that is so important, is agreed upon in an assembly that establishes value such that it allows producers' families continue to reinvest and grow the collective enterprise. Here we saw in the place, the winery, the cups. We need to involve all knowledge, all the experience of the civilization about all times. We need the humility to recognize. We need the capability of integration. Let's wake up. Nature is waiting for us. Here are people with the different workshops that organize INTA to allow the people to be guardians of the nature, guardians of the seeds. Thank you very much. Muchas gracias.
I'm going to talk briefly about moving community. I've been looking at what happens to cultural heritage during the process and outcomes of relocation. Oops. So climate change relocation is going on in the United States right now, particularly in a number of communities in Alaska and Louisiana. So I've been looking at that as a US-based case study of the situation here. But what we see from around the world is that climate change is leading to many dislocations. Here we've got a map of Africa and the probability of armed conflict due to temperature, drought, and flooding. And of course, this is just Africa. And you can see through the central part of the continent, there is conflict and high climate change. We have a correlation there between those two. So what we are seeing is violent removal as well as climate change relocation that is not violent, that doesn't have to do with ethnic cleansing, but we've got both of them that produce a significant amount of trauma for the communities. So one of the questions are, where do people go? And it's clear that the most vulnerable are the most affected, and the most vulnerable are the ones that have the least options for where they go. So there's an immediate, where do people go in the first month after a disaster or forced relocation? The short term, 6 months to a year to 15 years or more, is commonly spent in some kind of a refugee camp. And then long term, we're looking for permanent relocations. And so we can look at what's going on in current refugee camps to get a sense of how people move their cultural heritage with them and move their landscape heritage with them. And it doesn't take much analysis of this image to identify some very specific cultural landscape forms in the settlement pattern that that people are bringing with them and recreating even in a short-term location like this refugee camp in the Congo. We can also see, as people are moving to permanent resettlement, what they are doing in their gardens and how they're bringing their cultural heritage, their cultural landscape heritage with them in their garden spaces. And so those two provide tremendous opportunities for some analysis about how we look at cultural landscapes and climate change, particularly when we're thinking about migration. We tend to have two somewhat disparate groups: refugees who are being moved out of their countries entirely, and then internally displaced people who are moving within country. But the real question for both of these is, how is landscape heritage maintained? And as we look at people's landscapes, there is a real home and a new home. There's a real home that has tangible and immovable heritage, things that no one can take with them physically. There is tangible and movable heritage, so those small artifacts that we can carry with us. And then there is intangible heritage. And there is an interaction between the real home and the new home that has to do with memory and specific actions. A lot of the memory has to do with the five senses. Psychological research is showing that there's a tremendous connection between sight, sound, taste, touch, and smell, and understanding our environment. We learn to understand our environment through our five senses when we are just small children. So we organize, we process, and we remember our environment that way. And that's also how we understand our place in the world. So this connection to place is a really fundamental thing that's developed from a very, very early age. And one example is food. So how we cook, what we eat, is intimately connected to place and the cultural landscape we live in. And also how we source food, as Anna was talking about, how we preserve it, how it's connected to the physical location that we live in is also incredibly important. So the question is, when we move, how do we take home with us? We typically take it in artifacts, oral traditions, practices, and then an idealized place that's that cultural landscape. And it's that tangible, immovable place that we're trying to recreate, an idealized place that we want to recreate in our home interiors, our gardens, and in reshaping urban space and form, which is at the basis of moving communities under climate change. So distance that people are moving and ecosystem change is also an important driver in this movement from the real home to the new home. And even if you take distance out of it, even if we're relocating communities within a relatively short distance from the location that has gone under, that's no longer viable due to sea level rise, that has fire implications, that has excessive storm implications. Even if you take distance out, you're still oftentimes looking at ecosystem change. And given the connection to the five senses, that is a hard hurdle to overcome. And it has to do with ontological security, with the sense of order and continuity that we have in our experiences through those five senses, our confidence our trust and our feeling of being connected. And then security of tenure, security that we will be able to live in the location that we are in. So looking at 2 locations in the United States, one has been Newtok, Alaska, and the other one is Ile de Jean Charles in Louisiana. Both of these have been undergoing relocation, active relocation, in the past 2 decades. So Ile de Jean Charles started in 2005 when the Army Corps of Engineers excluded them from the flood levy. That means that the island was not included within the banks of a flood levy that would protect them both from storm surges and also from sea level rise. And so at that point, they decided to move and entered into a long-term process of how to plan for that move. They planned through to 2015, and then through the Housing and Urban Development through the federal government, they were awarded $48 million. But that went to the state of Louisiana. And to make a longer story short, what happened was all of the planning for maintaining the Choctaw tribes, cultural heritage, connection to landscape, ability to recreate their community in a new location went out the window and was not respected by the state. So in looking at these examples of communities, one of the things that becomes most prevalent is the fact that heritage is not at all being respected in the moving process. So as we, someone is asking for remote control of the screen. Could you, I keep having to hit decline. In Newtok, what happened, Newtok, Alaska, what happened was that climate change relocation became a much more integrated thing, and the tribe took care of it themselves with outside money and with land from the National Park Service. So what we are finding in these case studies are the opportunities and constraints revolve around, first of all, finding land. And I'll talk more about that in a second. Maintaining agency and local decision-making. And then that is closely related to local decisions on what to move. So if you're moving a relatively short distance, is it important to move, for example, the cemetery? And then there are questions of long-term funding for land, for infrastructure, and for housing. So, as I said, finding land is the most important. There are federal, state, local, and land trust lands in the United States that could be available, because the underlying assumption here is that the real estate market, the private real estate market, will raise the cost of privately held land beyond the means of vulnerable populations, but also to people who have stayed in place too long. So long-term, the cost of private real estate will become impossible to achieve, and land will have to come from federal, state, local, and land trust land banks. We've got a lot of national protected areas. I won't go through these in detail, but in an earlier study, I did a legal analysis of what is possible in the United States. And we have to look at whether there are critical ecological and existing cultural resources that have to be protected on potential move sites. Does the parcel pose risks to development? So is it still located below sea level? Is it still located with major disaster risk? And is it close to existing communities and sources of employment? That's a really important one for communities that are moving. Is the parcel close to the home location where people want to stay and therefore reflect a similar ecosystem? The legal constraints in the United States revolve around legislation and legal precedent. And so we find that as we're looking at the possibilities for land, federal land has a high likelihood, as does local legislation, to change uses from conservation use into new development use. So where do we go from here? Very quickly, to sum up, one of the major questions, of course, is access to land. That's the primary issue. How are we going to get access to land for communities that need to move? So the major question is the new land culturally appropriate? If you've got a culture that relies on seafood as a primary protein source, moving them into upland is going to be problematic for cultural heritage traditions, but also for this ontological security sense of place that's related to food. Long-term funding is also a major issue in terms of the land, infrastructure, and housing. There's currently a major court case going through for Katrina victims that moved back into New Orleans in the early 2000s, where the houses that were built that were funded by a nonprofit were substandard. And so this question of long-term funding, the United States likes to do that with a lot of non-governmental support. But if that non-governmental support is no longer able to fund, as they aren't in this case, the charity that funded the initial houses has gone defunct. When that happens, the government has to step in to support the infrastructure and housing and health of the community. So it's also important, therefore, in the comprehensive planning process at state and local levels in the United States, to designate land for short-term disaster refugee camps and long-term permanent housing for people as they need to move. And in addition, this continuity of traditional knowledge is incredibly important. It is directly related to land and how that is moved and how that continues with a relationship with the land is really poorly understood right now. It is poorly valued in the government levels, and it also needs a tremendous amount of work in order to achieve that. Maintaining agency and community engagement and political power in decision-making for how to move, where to move, how the new community should be designed, what to move with you, all of those decisions need to be made at the local level, need to be made by the community that is moving. And again, that's not something that is well understood, nor is it something that is well supported in the federal government regulations or responses to emergencies and resettlement efforts. And then, of course, ontological security and the icons of place, the more that those can be respected, the more that those can be moved and recreated, the less trauma there will be for communities that are moving, and the more long-term sense of place and security that those communities will feel. Now we'll go to questions.
Hi, Elizabeth. I'd love to have something to say. Sorry, you can't see my video. I'm going to keep it down just in case of bandwidth. We've got lots of load shedding in South Africa at the moment. So if I go anywhere, I'm going to disappear.
Super.
You use the term, so we have a lot of movements, whether it's planned or unplanned in South Africa. And flooding isn't so much of an issue, but often drought is a very huge issue. And obviously that's a lot more incremental, and it's not as obvious. And people start leaving, but to be able to plan for that, I think needs to be done at a state level, because it's happening. We have desertification, we have deserts, and people aren't managing to live there anymore, but for it's a lot less obvious. So I'm wondering if you've looked at any case studies that involve relocation on the basis of drought and how one works with something like that. That was my one question. And the other comment I had, which just is that you use the term community quite a lot, but in my experience of working here, that's really not a term we can easily use, because decision making within the community is often the absolute most difficult thing to get to, is for the community to actually agree on what they want. And we find that the hardest part is actually the infighting, rather than anyone on the outside saying what you should or shouldn't do. But this, they really struggle to make these decisions within the community as to what's the best for everyone. So I was wondering what experiences you've had around that, and whether you have any case studies to speak to those.
Yes, so definitely I'll address the first one and then the community decision making. So the first one was drought. We don't have community relocations, full-scale community relocations in the United States due to drought yet. And so that hasn't been one of my case studies. But as you think about sea level rise, we often think about it happening very quickly. It's done and it's over with. What happens with sea level rise, though, it's very slow and incremental in the same way as drought. And what happens is the soil is increasing in salinization, and so becomes unusable. You also get rising damp in homes. And so it's a slow creep that is very similar to the slow creep of drought. So I think the experiences of the communities are actually closer than you might expect. The other question is community organizing. In the United States, we struggle with community organizing and community decision-making as well. And the reality is that the more homogeneous the community, so with the Choctaw tribe, and then the community in Newtok, which is one tribal corporation in Alaska, there is already a group that is decision-making and has been decision-making for a long time. So decision-making in that type of community is a little bit more direct, a little bit easier, but certainly there are always differing opinions in the community, and it is always going to be a messy thing. And I think that's the real problem for governments, and particularly emergency management, who just wants to get the job done and get it done now, without realizing that there are so many spin-off problems from not recognizing community self-determination. I hope that answered your question.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
happy to jump in. First of all, want to say these were just three exceptional presentations, and as the webinar has unfolded, one can see the connections among them, and very excited about what I heard today. I hope that this will be, the recording will be shared broadly. If we could use, go beyond our little network on WhatsApp and get it on LinkedIn and kind of repost it just to put it out there. I think there's some messages that need to be heard by others, for example, on the more nature conservation and environmental side. Couple of connections that I wanted to draw. First of all, Elizabeth, I felt that your presentation, it really brings us into a much deeper understanding of community building by dislocated people than is often put out there by refugee kind of oriented organizations, and that was really valuable. There are some other considerations like language, which I would like to flag up, and the maintenance of and continuation of language as people are relocated, and obviously that depends on the context, and also the welcomingness of where people might be relocated to. So there's a kind of a contextual piece that isn't just neatly addressed by the landscape, but also has to do with maybe the broader culture of a given community or state. I saw parallels with an initiative, and I'll pop it into the chat there, that I learned about on something called Native Seed Podcast, which the Cultural Conservancy puts out, and I highly recommend it. And it connects also to Anna's presentation, and this is an initiative to rematriate seed, native seed, from places where Native Americans originally were, such as the Cherokee, who were forcibly relocated over 150 years ago. And they looked also to some of these same questions of other aspects of their heritage, including the relocation of grave sites, to inform how they are now rematriating, and they say that instead of repatriating, seed to the new places where they are. I'll pop that in, and I also wanted to mention to Anna the Agroecology Fund, which is a consortium of donors that support projects very like the ones you just described, including these kinds of community seed exchanges, fairs, and so on, as well as a whole array of agroecological projects. So a question for you, Anna, is, are there NGOs who are involved in the project? Because those tend to be the best candidates for the Agroecology Fund support.
There are different. There are cooperatives, there are NGOs, but they are interconnected, and the government made that they have a legacy, or try to have a legacy join to can be permanent, that they can continue this work. The government tried to, because in the first time, this movement is more or less 20 years ago, from 20 years. Before they do this, more or less the same, but all work, or the people work alone, families alone. Now they are joining, the government are joining, and the people to have a synergy, and they can produce all together. And for that, they need a legal framework, and the government do that, but it's a huge effort, because, for example, in the province of Misiones, there was an engineer, a forestry engineer, and all her life she works to do the certificate, to do that. And when she retired, 1 year later, the province have the certificate. All her life work to do that. It's not easy, and it's not all solved and all it's okay. No, it's a lot of problems, but I suppose it's when we began with one, we can join another, we can join an example to join and to show to the people that it's possible, but step by step.
I'm Sridevi Rao from India. I had posted my question in the chat, but quickly, can I?
Sure, go ahead.
All right. So this is about indigenous communities who have to migrate because of climate change, and they are artisans and craftsmen also. And they source their materials from nature, from where they had lived for centuries, or have been as nomads also. They gather these materials, and because of climate change, when they migrate, they actually have to settle in a place to get government subsidies for shelter and food and so on. And they lose these cultural practices, and arts and crafts suffer because their natural materials are cannot be sourced anymore because they've lost their natural habitat as such. So I would like to know the comments from distinguished speakers about what they feel about this. Thank you.
Yes, for example, in Argentina, it's real, there are a lot of things that are lost, and other we are recovering. For example, the languages, the Quechua, there are a lot of groups that are working in different aspects. For example, one is what seeds and recuperate I don't know exactly the word, the crops, and to produce like ancient forms with taking in account the nature. In others is a mix, and it's not all the perfect situation because it's not the climate change and the place and the people change. We go to recover and to exchange with the new technology. We want to respect that, but we want how to can recover all that ancient knowledge and how to can apply that to the new reality. It's different things. We cannot, for example, make crops like all like ancient form because there are a lot of people in the world, and we cannot. The food is not cannot be for all the people. The food. We change the technology to can take more food for more people. We can change both, and what is wrong in the technology that we use now, we can change, and it's a new system. We recover the ancient, we have the actuality, and how we need to join and to go in advance with our reality. It's not one thing, it's more, and they are entangled. It's not the same. Because all like ancients, we cannot. We need to go to the supermarket, we need the phone, with a lot of things. And how we can to return to nature and to save the actuality when we can. I don't know if it's sufficient, but it's not easy. But I suppose we can do that.
That was a really good answer, Anna. There's also been a similar issue in coastal South Carolina with the Gullah community in basket making and in access to the materials that people are using for basket making. And I know Carrie, who's still on, has done some work in this. Would you like to say a couple of words about that?
Sure. Hold on.
Not to put you on the spot.
Sorry, just need to make sure I unmute. Yeah, there's been quite a bit of work, and you know as well as I, Elizabeth, about the details of this, but regarding materials specifically, it was interesting, and granted, my work is probably 15 years old, so you may have more recent thoughts on this, Elizabeth, but in general, one of the big issues was really, there's basically 2 or 3 components that make up sweetgrass baskets. Long leaf pine needles is one of them. There's also different kind of rushes are one of them, but also sweetgrass. And sweetgrass is a very, I'll say, finicky and yet not finicky material. But there's a very specific ecotone in which it will grow, and it will not grow out of those areas. Those areas happen to be where a lot of resort development was happening. And so because these were a lot of gated communities, they literally blocked people who had freely collected these materials from accessing these materials. It's been very interesting to see the acculturation, shall we say, of sweetgrass being planted in these resort communities, but then reaching out to communities to harvest it. The thing that I find fascinating about it is the sweetgrass, and it might be just pure perception, but there has been studies by the USDA of planted sweetgrass versus harvested naturally sweetgrass as to the structural capability and use for basket making. And the Gullah Geechee makers essentially will say that the planted sweetgrass, basically because you're starting to pamper it, is not as structurally sound as the ones that are harvested naturally. So even though there is actually probably more sweetgrass that is planted now in areas that it's not typically harvested, it's been very difficult for the sweetgrass basket makers to find quality pieces. On top of that, they used to collect the longleaf pines from the, roadside, from the natural areas, etc. But now they actually have to work with middlemen to pay for these materials that are were free. So anyway, it's a very complex system that has evolved over the past 30 to 40 years. And really from a artisan standpoint, where everyone who was Gullah Geechee and making these sweetgrass baskets for function were looked down upon. And the skill was not appreciated a good 60 to 80 to 100 years ago. Anyway, it's a really fascinating commentary. And I don't know, Elizabeth, if you want to add anything to that, obviously, please feel free.
That was fantastic. Thank you, Carrie. Absolutely
you.
my experience as well. Yeah.
Elizabeth, if I can jump in, it's so interesting to hear that about the sweetgrass. It's so similar with medicinal plants in the same way. So they move from somewhere where you get specific plants and they have generations worth of knowledge in the medicinal properties of those plants, and they move to a new part of the country where the plants are completely different. And then they have these entire informal markets of having to, and even the initiation ceremonies that they have to go through, they have to get skins from the place where they come from. They have to get the plants from the place that they come from rather than from where they're living. It's very interesting. And the idea that things have to be wild. We have exactly the same, I don't know if you have the same in other parts or in the States, this idea that the wild medicinal plants are the ones that have the potency, and that even though we have so many domesticated similar versions, and then you have a lot of the traditional healers that use the domesticated ones because they can't afford to buy from the middleman, exactly as Carrie was saying. So sorry, very interesting to see the connections over the whole world. That's fantastic.
Absolutely.
And just to add to that, there's another very quick example of the when the Cherokee were forced removal in the 1830s, 1850s. The eastern band of Cherokee basically refused to move and hid in the mountains of North Carolina, and there still is what they call an eastern band. But the majority of people that were forced to move west, about 1,000 miles away in Kansas, very different ecology, very different place. There's been lots of conversations and study of how do you continue having your traditional rituals when you don't have access to the ecology. how do you create community? So it's really these conversations, I think, keep happening again and again all over the world through history and past times as well as current.